Father Spitzer, welcome to the Tangent. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a real honor to be with you guys today. Thank you.
Now, we are interviewing you today about near-death experiences and basically anything else that comes up. We are called the Tangent. Um, but
Hence the
but I
tangent.
gotta tell you, I was extraordinarily excited about when I found out that we could have you on the show, um, because I think this is a topic that reaches out to people. It's like it's just wacky enough, you know, that it opens eyes.
Hmm.
So for example, we had Father Vincent Lampert on. He's an exorcist just a couple weeks ago. And the amount of
Uh-huh.
people that were like, "Man, I gotta listen to that episode," because it's just enough
Yeah,
out of the ordinary. Um, so I guess here's my first question for you.
right.
Let's define terms. What is a near-death experience?
Well, a near-death experience it normally has two phases. The first is when clinical death occurs. So when a person has a heart attack or
Mm,
something equally traumatic, which causes oxygen to stop flowing to the brain for at least 15 to 20 seconds, then the brain begins to shut down because there's no electrical voltage going through it. So when you get to the point where there's no voltage at all in the cerebral cortex and the frontal cortex and minimum amount in the lower brain and the brainstem, you get what's called flat EEG, and then fixed and dilated pupils, no gag reflex. When that occurs, many patients report, both children and adults report that a soul body leaves their physical body. I use the word soul body with a hyphen there because it doesn't have, even though it sort of looks like what you looked like when you were 30 or so, it doesn't have physical qualities, structures, and processes in it. So, in other words, it can go through walls because it's
mm,
not inhibited by those physical structures.
mm.
It can defy gravity because it is not subject to those physical laws. Now, at that juncture, some people go through a tunnel. Most people do come out the other side and find that when they're through the tunnel, they're looking at themselves from above and a little bit beyond where their physical body might be lying. So if it's in an operating room or something, they can see the body there in the operating room. And in the first phase, veridical data is frequently recorded, remembered, and recorded and recalled. And so after the fact, when a person comes back into his physical body, he can report, for example, to independent researchers after the fact. Well, I went through the hospital walls, and as one lady said, I was hovering up by the third floor of the hospital, and I saw a tennis shoe on the ledge outside the hospital as I was hovering there. The shoelace was stuck underneath the heel. It was a worn left toe. And if you go outside that hospital, you're going to see it because I saw exactly what was going on in that hospital when I was clinically dead. So, of course, one of the researchers goes out on the ledge, and sure enough, there's the tennis shoe with the shoelace, etc.
Wow.
So there's all kinds of other things happening. We have, by the way, truly 1,000 cases of accurate, 100% accurate veridical data reported by these patients. Completely unique sets of circumstances. It couldn't have been predicted by anybody. They're unique things that are going on, like the tennis shoe. A person, comes in and says, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, we lost your dentures." No, no, you didn't. The red-haired nurse, grabbed those dentures and out of my mouth right before you guys put the paddles on me and threw them into a drawer underneath a machine that looks like this. So if you go down to the OR, you're going to find my dentures, and sure enough, there they are. But this The second is not just these thousands of cases of veridical data that are reported 100% accurately during the time when you couldn't do anything, right? Flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils. You don't have any electrical activity going on in your, thinking, your cognitional, cortices, nor in your visual or auditory lobes. You are basically mentally dead. And so when that occurs, you shouldn't be able to see anything yet 100% accurately. That's pretty amazing. But it's the blind people that are really significant, because in the Kenneth Ring studies, 80% of blind people, most of whom are blind from birth, see for the first time when they're clinically dead.
That
So,
is
for example,
unbelievable.
it's unbelievable. And they too report veridical data of things
Huh.
going on outside the operating room. So we got this kid like Bradley Burroughs, one of the many, many examples. He's a 16-year-old kid, blind from birth. He goes right through the hospital walls, right? He's sitting out there and he goes, wow, I'm seeing snow for the first time in my life. And while I'm looking at this and just seeing how beautiful it looked, I saw the grooves in the snow that were there. And not only that, I actually saw those grooved areas for train tracks going right into a grove of trees that was in the distance off to the right. And sure enough, a train came by. And the one thing trains have, of course, are schedules. And you can coordinate that train schedule with the time that Bradley Burroughs underwent, clinical death, like EEG, etc. So basically, the train goes by, he describes it perfectly, says there's a big sign on the back of the train with an arrow pointing to the right. And sure enough, that train passes right by the hospital, goes right down the tracks, and goes to the right into the grove of trees in the distance. And that's exactly what happened at the exact time that Bradley had his experience clinical death. So when you start looking at that, you can't say hallucination will explain that. You can't say that stimulation of the parietal lobe will explain that, because blind people don't have any visual images to hallucinate in their physical brain. I mean, these have got to be the real deal. By the way, they couldn't have seen it anyway with their physical eyes. So, I mean, the point is pretty clear. The evidence now is so convincing that the New York Academy of Sciences in 2022, basically in their proceedings, writes that there's a credible possibility that your consciousness is going to survive your bodily death. And that's proven in many excellent peer-reviewed medical published studies, like in the Lancet and so forth.
Wow. So if we're looking at these experiences, we're going to see that there's still sort of a temporal reality to them. This is something that they're experiencing while they're looking at their immediate surroundings in the hospital room or in the room that they were in, or just outside. Right.
Yeah.
So that there's a very real way in which this is the stuff that's happening right now. So real world circumstances. My dentures are in that drawer. The red-haired nurse grabbed them.
You met yours.
Yeah. my dentures. Yeah. Well, but as we look at that,
never speak badly of the dead, because many people go right into the waiting room next door and
they're going to hear the whole thing.
That's it. Yeah.
So if we're looking at somebody who might maybe be kind of skeptical about this or have some questions, these would be the kinds of stories that tell them that there is something more than just clinical death. There's something more than just this physical body that can't quite be explained. But a lot of these...
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of these stories don't just include that immediate stepping into the next room or stepping outside the hospital. A lot of these stories also include that tunnel that you were talking about, and moving towards the light, and a voice and an experience of a spiritual presence, knowing something of God that they didn't know before.
That's right.
And so I like kind of this approach of let's just talk about the immediate stuff, the dentures in the drawer. That's a really good story. The blind who have these visions and who are able to describe visual things very accurately.
It seems
What's
like
happening in those spiritual experiences?
Well, in the spiritual ones, that's the phase 2 part. So
Okay.
that's the second phase. You move from this world to another worldly domain. Adults, about 85% of adults will have, will go to a very pleasant domain. Let me put it that way. A beautiful domain oftentimes includes their relatives and, a loving white light that they perceive as unconditionally loving, and all pain disappears. About 15% of adults actually experience what I would call a very dark, otherworldly experience. So they would be moving into an area which is either very empty, alienating, and lonely, occurs frequently in a lot of suicide cases, or sometimes into a very horrifying world that is populated by almost demonic sorts of presences and beings that are very cruel themselves. And these would normally pertain to people that were kind of cruel during their lives and so forth. So in any case, children, on the other hand, pretty much are 100% go to a very pleasant place and so forth. Now, the adults that actually go to a very beautiful and pleasant place, a significant number of them will some relatives, and it's about 95% of the time it's relatives, 5% it's friends, but about 95% of the time a relative of the person, and oftentimes the relative was not hitherto known by the patient. So in other words, the person will come along and say, well, I'm your aunt so-and-so. And he goes, oh, I didn't even know I had an aunt so-and-so. Well, that's because I died 20 years before you were born. I'm sort of like your great aunt. Oh, okay. But I knew your mom, and I knew, your grandmother, and, I just want to tell you that now is not your time, and so forth and so on. And I just wanted to also have you deliver a message to your mom that I'm just fine. I'm in heaven. Here's a positive proof. Here is the nickname of the teddy bear that we had, that I gave to her when she was just a little girl. And of course, the mother, of course, never disclosed this or anything like it to the person who's experiencing this now, and he goes back and tells them. So now, Bruce Grayson and Emily Kelly at the University of Virginia Medical School Department of Perceptual Studies, they basically, have been cataloging for quite some time these experiences where someone will report, I met this hitherto unknown relative, and he or she told me, that, some information that I had no idea about, and I really couldn't possibly have known, but my mom or my dad or somebody verified that information was exactly correct, and so forth. So I mean, you can get like that. Remember Colton Burpo in the book Heaven is for Real.
Yeah.
He's just a little 4-year-old kid, but nevertheless, when he goes up to heaven, the interesting thing is he right away meets his sister. And she comes right out and hugs him and says, he goes, well, who are you? He goes, well, yeah. And she goes, oh, I'm your sister. Well, I don't think you are. My sister doesn't quite look like you. And she goes, well, no, I'm your other sister who, I died in mommy's tummy when I was only 2 months old. And then I came here, and I've been growing up in heaven. And he goes, well, what's your name? And she goes, well, I wasn't given a name because mommy and daddy didn't know whether I was a boy or a girl. So, of course, Colton goes back, and at one point he's just, he's 4 years old, right? He doesn't think, So one day he's at breakfast or something with his mother, and he goes, Mom, I met my sister in heaven. And she goes, she's not in heaven. She's right here. And he goes, not that sister. my other sister. And of course, the mother goes, "Well, what other sister? You don't have another sister." "Oh, yes, I do. She was 2 months old when she died in your tummy." And the mother, of course, knows
Wow.
exactly what he's talking about, and she's beginning to drop her, mouth open. And he goes, "Well, what's her name?" And he tells her, "Well, you and Daddy didn't know whether she was a boy or a girl, so you didn't name her." And the mother, of course, starts crying and so forth. But the main thing is, this happens all the time. So the Kellys and Bruce Grayson over at University of Virginia Medical School, they've been cataloging these things, and it's an impressive group of stories of people who have data that wouldn't have otherwise been known. So, I mean, again, there's something there, but that is not just the end of the story. Oh, by the way, one other thing. You look like you looked when you were about between 25 to 30. And
Hmm.
this happens all the time where people will say, "Well, is this your grandfather?" Because grandfather will come down and meet with a person or something. And he goes, "No, that's not him. He's too old." So they go, "Oh, okay, well, let's look for somebody younger here." But they bring up the grandfather when he's 30 and they put a picture up and you go, "Yep, that's him."
Huh.
And so, of course,
Hmm.
again, you can see that there's been sort of the little girl, the 2-month-old, is growing up, whereas the older people wind up looking like they looked when they were around 30. But in any case, the identification is clear. What's even more interesting is the encounter with the white light. So maybe after encountering a deceased relative and friend, or they may not have encountered a deceased relative, but only the white light. When you come into the presence of the white light, of course, all pain disappears, emotional, physical, psychological, etc. So when that occurs, then the person feels utterly, utterly affirmed. Now, the white light may go through a judgment, may go through some kind of what they call a life review with the person, and that might cause some degree of regret in things. But nevertheless, after the life review, there is clearly acceptance and love on the part of this unrestrictedly loving, very bright light that doesn't hurt the eyes. Most adults identify the white light with either God or Christ. However, little kids, when they identify Christ, it's not as this loving white light, this transformed, that transforms their being and away from pain. It's rather a figure, a very physical looking figure in
Hmm.
heaven. And so, very similar to Colton's experience. Colton Burbo's experience with Jesus, very typical of little kids. They'll say, "No, I saw Jesus in heaven, but it's not a white light. It's a person, and he looked like they try to describe him, with the longish hair and so forth and so on." And so they say, "Okay, well, identify his picture. We got about 30 Jesuses here to look at, and you can take a look." And of course, now Colton, right away, he goes through these pictures, and when he gets to this one picture that a lot of kids, not all of them for sure, but a large, large percentage of kids see that picture and go, "That's him." Well,
Hmm.
where did that picture came from? This little girl, I believe her name was Carmenac or something, or uh, um, uh, and you can just look at it on Google. But she had visions of Jesus when she was a little kid, and she had an extraordinary capacity for art, and was able to kind of sketch this picture, and then it was kind of gussied up, if I can put it that way, by a professional artist. And they slipped this in with the other 30 pictures, right? The Sacred Heart pictures and all the other pictures. And, Colton or the other kids will just go, well, not that, not that. There he is. That's Jesus right there. And of course, again, it just coincides with how Jesus appeared to this little girl who had the artistic proclivities. But to make a long story short, this is pretty consistent stuff for people, who go to heaven and little kids who go to heaven. And there's all kinds of other data too. I mean, honestly, once you have a near-death experience and you're in this beautiful heavenly domain without the pain and encounter the white light or Jesus if you're a little kid, basically what's going on there is you lose your what's called death anxiety. And death anxiety is a subconscious anxiety. I mean, you can also have conscious death anxiety, but a religious person basically controls his death anxiety because of his faith. He's not going to suffer, or she's not going to suffer from it. However, you can't get rid of the subconscious death anxiety. So if I start showing you ink blots, or I start showing you sketches of crossbones and skulls and sharks and daggers and blood, if I put a modified polygraph on you to measure the sympathetic nervous system response, if I put that on you and I show you those death symbols, you're going to react. And you can't, it's subconscious, so you can't control what's going on that subconscious, unconscious level, but your sympathetic nervous system, sure, you recognize it, you react to it. But if you have a near-death experience, it's gone. It's 100% gone. And that, by the way, even if you had that near-death experience as a little kid, goes to you 30 or 40 years old.
Wow. So we've got these phases or different types, right? So the first kind of the experience of leaving the body and being in the general area, and then the experience of actually going to another place and being in the presence of God, encountering Jesus, anything like that. Is there a third stage that's like the return? Coming back
the
to the body?
Is not really a stage. It's just normally what happens is either the white light, or in the case of a lot of other people, the relatives, right, will say, well, this is not your time. And of course, a lot of people just go, well, I don't want to go. I want to stay here. And they go, well, no, you have something you have to do. And then, well, what's that? I'm not at liberty to disclose that to you. There is a purpose for you in your life, and this is going to be important, but you'll come back. So just, stay on the path you're staying on, complete your purpose, and all will be well. So, of course,
it's really interesting that you bring that up, that there's a hesitancy to go back. I know a priest he's now deceased, but many years before, he had a heart attack, and he actually had this experience of clinical death. And he had the experience of feeling himself leaving his body and seeing the light and hearing the voice of Jesus speaking to him and knowing that he was in the presence of God. And when he was told it's not your time, and he came back, he would always say, and anytime you got him to talk about this story, and he didn't like to talk about it too much, but he'd just say, I want to go back. I want to go back. And I always thought that was a very profound thing.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the reaction of a whole lot of people is, I have to go back, or sometimes it's just an announcement that you're going back, and before you know it, there they are back in their bodies again. But the remnant is always there. The memory is so powerful, it actually it totally gets rid of a subconscious or unconscious death anxiety.
So if we're looking at this, we're going to see that there's now the psychological death anxiety, and they're recognizing that this is taken away by this experience. The medical field knows that people can clinically die and come back, and now there's this data that's being added to it that suggests there is something that's not medical that's happening. There is something on this soul level, but to my knowledge, are there is the medical community acknowledging the soul? How is this all kind of taken in that scientific community? Because now there's data that says that this happens. There's consistent testimony that says that this happens. So how is it received in that scientific area?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when the New York Academy of Sciences proceedings last year declared that you have a credible possibility that your consciousness will survive bodily death, that is incredible. I mean, even 15 years ago, I couldn't imagine, a society with that high prestige and such careful consideration of their articles actually publishing something like that. But today, because of the overwhelming number of cases of not only veridical data like the dentures or the tennis shoe or something, but also the 80% of blind people that see it for the first time, it's simply inexplicable. But that's the first thing that has made, the transition. And by the way, these are really good, well done studies. You have the Samuel Parnia study at the University of Southampton. That's an excellent study there. That's a 2014 study with 2,060 patients. Very carefully done, where he identifies a significant percentage of people for which, whose conscious awareness can be proven, and it's inexplicable in physical terms. I mean, no oxygen to the brain, flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupil. What are we talking about here? Furthermore, with the blind people, again, all physicalist explanations pale, because stimulation of the brain, anoxia, hallucination, whether it's drug-induced hallucination or droplets or stimulation of the parietal lobe, doesn't matter. I mean, there's no visual image in the brain to be hallucinated or stimulated.
Right.
But the differences between a hallucination anyway and a near-death experience are so vast. To begin with, in order to have a hallucination, you need electrical activity in the brain. In other words, if you don't have any electrical activity in the brain, you ain't going to hallucinate anything. Now,
and Matt, that's why you never hallucinate. Right.
So, but that's it. So you basically, if you see that there's electrical activity, then it's not a near-death experience. And if you have no electrical activity as you have in a near-death experience, it's not a hallucination. But that's not the only difference. I mean, hallucinations are downright weird. They are very different from the way reality is. Near-death experiences, the visions that people have are 100% accurate. That's very different from weird, fragmented, distorted things.
Right, yeah.
And lastly, hallucinations produce extreme discomfort and even agitation and even anxiety. Whereas near-death experiences, unless you have one of the 15% that has a dark religious experience, if you have a good near-death experience, you have peace, for sure peace, the removal of death anxiety, etc. So totally different from all the physicalist explanation. I think it mounted up so much that basically the medical community has really begun to shift. Hey, by the way, I mean, the whole picture of, the medical and scientific community has really shifted, itself. I mean, when Francis, well, I should move that back. When the first studies of scientists were done, this would be even before Francis Collins, be basically 1945. There was probably about maybe 40% of the scientific community declared themselves to be theists. That's very, there's a lot of people who just didn't answer the question. But basically, it seemed like agnostics and atheists outweighed the theists in that early age. That's not so today. The last Pew survey of the American Association for the Advancement of Science had 51% of scientists declared themselves to be believers in God or a higher transcendent power. 21% declared themselves agnostic. Only 20% declared themselves to be atheists. 8% were too scared to declare, I guess. But in any case, the point, though, that was made is, oh, no, 20% atheists, 51% theists, things have changed. But here's the really interesting part. 66% of young scientists, 35 years of age or under, 66% declare themselves to believe in God or a higher transcendent power. Only 15% declare themselves agnostic, and about 15%, excuse me, declare themselves to be atheists. The medical community, now here, this answers your question. Figure this out. 76% of the medical community, the doctors, believe in God or a higher transcendent power. 3/4 profess belief in God or a higher transcendent power. 2/3 of them practice their religion. Now that is downright really totally much improved statistics, from the days of Lourdes when all the miracles were starting to first happen, be manifest there, all the atheistic doctors that were out there. Boy, is that not true today. Now, this is, of course, U.S. statistics, but the main thing is only 12.1% are agnostics and 11.2% are atheists. And that's, a really very credible survey of thousands of doctors.
Would you think that has anything to do with the idea that as we've come to understand psychology more and just sort of the inner workings of the human mind, that doctors in their own training have just become more sensitive to what's going on in the needs and the hearts of their patients, so they're kind of better able to respond, so they see more than just the symptoms, more than just the disease and the pathologies and everything, so they're now better equipped to understand a reality that goes beyond just the physical and observable stuff that they have?
Well, I think that's surely part of the equation. I think 3 other things are part of the equation as well. I think these near-death experiences we've been talking about, there are a lot of clinical specialists who now say, yeah, I believe this happens, and I believe that there's a reality beyond the physical body. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I see this just so evidently, right? That there's got to be that reality, but I'm so fascinated by the documentation that you've been talking about, the way that they're studying this, and that this is taken so seriously, because we hear about Heaven is for Real. And it's a cute little book that comes in an adult version and a children's version, and it's great. Like, the word gets out there, but sometimes
it's anecdotal, but these are real studies. Yeah,
right. But to know that it's not only the anecdote, that there's also these great studies that have been done surrounding it, is so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's convincing to the doctors, and also they get to hear it again and again. And I think the second major thing that's going on with doctors, 76%, that's a significant percentage of believers in God. I think it's the miracles thing. HCT research in the Finkelstein Institute actually asked, did a huge study of doctors of whether they believed in miracles past and present. 74% of doctors said they believed in miracles in the past. 73% believed in miracles in the present. Again, the primary reason given was, in my own practice, I have seen naturalistically inexplicable events occurring, and they were always connected with prayer. That fact is bringing a lot of doctors to a belief in miracles who never would have had that. Like 50 years ago, forget it. But now it's the cat's out of the bag, as it were. And finally, you've got the third area, which is a lot of studies that have been done on, miraculous events. And even like the studies of Dr. Harold Koenig at Duke University, these are really excellent studies. Again, they show that people of prayer not only, have these miracles that sometimes occur, but they just plain have better physical and emotional health. I mean, this is statistically verifiable and brought out by several different studies that he and his colleagues at Duke University have assembled. Again, prayer. If you're a praying guy and a church going guy, you're just plain going to have, and you're kind of living out your faith with your moral and virtue practice, then basically you're going to have better physical and emotional health than someone who doesn't. He breaks it down cardiologically, endocrinologically, et cetera, all down the line. So, I mean, when you get to the end of it, I mean, if these studies, by the way, you can get a lot of them free on Google. They're published in, top-rate journals, and there's a top-rate institute at Duke, and it's very, very interesting to look at. But I think, the scientists, the doctors, they're starting to get the data, and it's really something that is beginning to make them think and get them a little bit over the line. Even to they don't want to admit to God, maybe a higher transcendent power. Fine.
Right. Now, Father Spitzer, given that third piece, that people with religious faith and religious practice who are living according to their faith tend to have better health outcomes overall. As we look at these experiences of near-death experiences and all of this, can we shift a little bit and ask the theological purpose, the theological meaning of this? Like, where is God in these, not just in the experience, but like through this near-death experience? What is God trying to bring to the world?
Well, my view is, obviously a faith-filled Catholic. I think, I also happen to love science, and I also happen to love very methodical sociological studies. And there's no contradiction.
This is all so convenient.
Well, exactly. For a skeptical generation, right? I mean, you've got a skeptical, scientifically oriented generation, and young people. I mean, the Gen Zs, they're believers in science. They will tell you, I mean, unquestionably, they believe that science has, gotten to the truth. Isn't it shocking, finally, when they see, wow, science is basically saying that belief in God is credible, belief in an afterlife is credible, and belief in a Christian afterlife is credible. That's, all of a sudden you begin to look at that data and you think, yiko, I wonder, if the confluence is meant by God to convince generation of people. I started a senior year curriculum and a middle school curriculum. The senior year elective course, I should say, with Sophia Institute for Teachers, called the Catholic Faith and Science. And I've got a middle school curriculum called Speak the Faith. Same thing. But basically what it's doing is it's taking all the recent data. I mean, it's like God is flooding us. He's opening up the floodgates with data that is so unbelievably persuasive and probative. I mean, these near-death experiences and the good studies, the studies of miracles, which are really good studies, the Duke University studies of people of prayer and how it affects your emotional and physical lives. And not only that, but all the new data. I mean, Stephen Hawking coming out in 2018 and declaring, that an infinite multiverse is really, it couldn't have been the kind of multiverse, a fractal multiverse that generated our universe. And to see, the fine-tuning coincidences for life in the midst of that fact that we're, the only really tenable option that is left to us anymore is an intelligent creator. I mean, you start looking at this, and I said, I got to take all this evidence. I got to put it all in a book. I got to get this delivered to our young people in a really credible course for seniors and a credible course for middle schoolers, because that's where the problems start, in middle school. And so
Yeah.
that's if people on the program here have kids in school, and your school has not yet signed up for the Catholic Faith and Science, just go to Sophia Institute for Teachers, like Sophia Wisdom, right? Sophia
Yeah.
Institute for Teachers. Go to that. Just click on the very first page. It'll come up as Catholic Faith and Science course, practically speaking. Just look at it. Have the teachers look at it. Do
Yeah.
not take a chance that your kids are not going to see this. It makes all the difference in the world. And the Gen Zs are the most vulnerable. 50% of them who are church-going Catholics right now will lose it by the time they're a sophomore in college. This is not me. This is a Pew 2012, 2015, 2018 surveys, as well as the CARA survey that at Georgetown Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate. So all I'm saying is we got to get off the dime and get moving here.
Yeah.
Our young people are desperately in need of this.
I love this idea of this course. We're gonna make sure we put that in the show notes so that you can find that link really easily. But I think what a brilliant thing to and these kinds of stories though have such a power, because there's not just scientific fact being presented, but there's a narrative that goes with it, and it's a story from a real person. It's a personal testimony, and the personal testimony, for all of the scientific data, personal testimony always has a way of grabbing at the heart, doesn't it? And so these people who have had a near-death experience who testify to it, and then to know that there's scientific information, data, studies that back up what they're talking about, that's got to be a very powerful thing.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to resist the fact that God kind of lined everything up. I mean, I do a lot on the Shroud of Turin relative to Jesus, because the 1988 carbon dating has been completely debunked by about 4 different scientific tests. I mean, it was just, I won't say it was a fraud, but it was certainly very mistaken in its outcomes. And now with a wide-angle X-ray scattering test that's been done that placed the shroud between 54 to 75 AD. I mean, that 1988 carbon dating is gonzo by the side. So the main thing is, well, what are we going to do with this Shroud of Turin? And there is not only such detailed evidence of Christ's crucifixion on it, but really detailed evidence for his resurrection. And again, the very question you posed. Why is God making this all available now in this scientific age? Because it's like he planned it 2,000 years ago. I'm going to get those skeptical scientists 2,000 years from now. Boy, are they going to be wowed when they see that only the particle radiation hypothesis is going to explain this.
Yeah.
Can you dig into the evidence for the resurrection on the Shroud of Turin?
Yeah, just in a real brief way here. I mean, essentially 3 things are there that are the telling signs. First of all, the image on the Shroud of Turin is a perfect 3-dimensional photographic negative image emblazoned on a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. So you're going to have to explain how the image got there. But remember, it's a photographic negative image. It's super precise. It's like it was taken by a camera. It's not bleeding into adjacent threads and so forth. It's like super precise. Then the really weird part is it's 3-dimensional. That is to say, there's evidence from the inside of the body. So you can see, like, for example, the backbone, you can see it, but you can see it in 3-dimensional proportionality to the flesh that surrounds the backbone. So it's like an MRI image, which you can see with what's called visual digital analyzers. So you can see the 3-dimensionality, the MRI effect, as it were, the layering of the 3-dimensional image. So you look at that and you go, I got to get one explanation that can give not only how the body became, how you're going to get the backbone there unless the body becomes transparent enough, right, spiritual or something enough to let the light signals or the particles, emerge so that it can be captured on the shroud. Well, anyway, I'm going to cut through a whole bunch of history and explanation. The one thing to note is that image, it's sitting on the uppermost surface of the fibrils, right? So, in other words, the image itself is not it has not penetrated into the middle of the threads, what's called the medulla of the threads, or the fibrils and fibers, and it has not penetrated into the middle of the cloth. So weird as this may seem, right? It's sitting there on the surface. So you got to explain that too, because if it were a paint, it would just, the liquid, right, would go right into the cloth, penetrate the surface of the fibers. It would go right to the middle of the cloth, right to the middle of the fibers. It would also spangle and go to adjacent fibers and so forth and so on. If you had a vapor, the same effect would occur, except it'd be worse, because the vapors would have begun to dissipate as they're approaching the cloth. So there's action at a distance here, right? Remember, the cloth does not touch every part of the body, yet there's an imaging that goes on every part of the body. So it has to be action at a distance. It has to be a result that is exceedingly precise. It has to be an explanation that doesn't penetrate the fibers and fibrils, that it has to be right on the surface of the cloth, and it has to be an explanation that can act at a distance and get three-dimensional layering, that's analyzable by a visual data analyzer. Now, you look at that and you go, what explanations do this? Well, first of all, it has to be radiation alone. Scorching can't do it, paints can't do it, vapors can't do it, rubs can't do it. Has to be radiation. That's the only thing that can act at a distance and give that kind of precision. What kind of radiation is the question? Well, there's two possible candidates. One possible candidate, this is the John Jackson and colleagues' hypothesis, is that it's vacuum ultraviolet radiation, a columnated vacuum ultraviolet radiation in very intense wattage. So it would be somewhere between 6 to 8 billion. That's with a B, billion watts. That's like 500,000 searchlights worth of columnated vacuum ultraviolet radiation emerging from that dead body, but it can only be for 1/40 billionth of a second. Now, because otherwise it would just turn that linen into ashes. So
I was thinking that exact same thing, actually.
Yeah, that it could only be 1/40 billionth of a second, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I figured you got there pretty quickly. Yeah.
So it's emblazoned there. Now, if you look at that, dead bodies don't normally do that, right? I mean, they don't normally emit 500,000 searchlights worth of light energy from every part of the body. So that's unusual. And secondly, of course, bodies don't normally turn mechanically transparent, right? So that, they don't become spiritual, so you can get inside data as well as surface data. So anyway, that's one of the hypotheses, but there are 42 enigmas on the shroud. About 21 of them are explained by the columnated vacuum ultraviolet radiation hypothesis with 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy. On the other hand, there's another explanation called the particle radiation hypothesis. This one explains all 42 enigmas, so obviously I'm very partial to it. Because I can't imagine another more complete explanation. Every single one of the enigmas on the cloth are explained by this hypothesis. So what is it? What they basically occurs, and this is, by the way, this was done by Jean-Baptiste Renaudot in France at the Institut Physique, and also by Kitty Little at Harwell Labs in Great Britain, and of course Arthur Lind here in the United States. So this is a good, well-tested hypothesis, and basically it holds that the whole body of Jesus at one moment, let's just say at least 30 hours after the body is placed in the shroud, but before, right, rigor mortis and other kinds of things will really settle in, to have the distortion, and not just rigor mortis, but I mean, the bodily fluids would begin to emerge and the decomposition of the body would be evident on the cloth. So it's got to be around 30 hours in that area, maybe a little more or so, but you can pretty much see that around that time, the body simultaneously undergoes nuclear disintegration. That's a low temperature nuclear reaction that occurs. Now, when that disintegration occurs, it's a pure miracle because the odds of having there's 7 octillion perfectly stable atomic nuclei in a body. They just don't go around disintegrating, right? The odds of this happening, that you're going to have 7 octillion, that's like a trillion, perfectly stable atomic nuclei suddenly disappearing all at the same time, all simultaneously, is about 10 raised to the 10 raised to the 40 to 1. That's like a monkey typing the first chapter of Macbeth perfectly by random tapping of the keys in a single try. Not gonna happen. So let's suppose that this is the explanation, that suddenly the entire body of Jesus undergoes low temperature nuclear reaction in which all of the stable atomic nuclei in the body begin to undergo disintegration. This will give rise simultaneously to 2 flows of particles. There's going to be there's going to be, let's say, positively charged particles, well, just charged particles, which are heavy particles. So these would be like protons and deuterons. Now, that flow of particles, remember, it has positive charge. So it's going to react with the negatively charged particles right in the linen cloth. And when those particles hit the very surface fibrils of the linen cloth, those protons and deuterons will interact with the electrons in the cloth and stop. But they will not only stop, they will stop and embed themselves into the surface of the cloth, and it will turn the cloth, make the cloth more friable. So in other words, it'll make the cloth kind of crispy. So a very, very strong indication that the particle was there, and that if this happens enough times, it makes it a very precise image right on the surface of the fibrils. Now there's another kind of particle flow that will happen, and that's a neutron flow. Neutrons don't have a charge, so what do? They just go right through the cloth. But when they're going right through the cloth, they're irradiating the blood while they're doing it, and they're also breaking up what we call weak linear carbonyl bonds. And then when those carbonyl bonds are reconstituted, they reconstitute around a crystalline structure. Now, those crystalline structures are much stronger than the linear carbonyl bonds, right, that were there previously. And so we should expect to find that the cloth is extraordinarily strong and resistant to solvents and all kinds of other things, which in fact the cloth is. So now you look at this, I'll just give you 4 enigmas explained, and I'm telling you right now, all 42 are explained. But first of all, we always wondered, hey, let's suppose this was a big old fraud, right? So you got, the apostles, they're going to go in there and swipe Jesus's body, and they're going to have to take the shroud off of the body before they swipe the body. So let's suppose they pull that shroud off after of course, the blood that's on the cloth and the blood that's remaining on the body, right? It's going to tear all those blood stains, fragment, segment, smear, all those blood stains. There are 372 blood stains on the shroud. All of them are going to get somehow fragmented and segmented and smeared, etc. But there's not a single smearing, fragmenting, or segmenting of the 372 bloodstains on the shroud. So, hey, wait a minute. No mechanical or human device could have been used to take that shroud off the body. So how could that have happened? How could it have happened? Well, if the body disappears, totally disappears, with all of its particles being embedded in the very linen in which it is contained, well, then you don't have to worry, because the blood that was on the surface of the body, if that doesn't disappear, it just remains on the cloth, and the body underneath it disappears. You got an explanation. There was nothing we could have, no way to explain how we could have got after the body, if that body had still been there. But if it disappeared, that's fine. Number 2, we always wondered, why are all those 372 bloodstains bright red? Why in the world is that happening? Well, because, right, you've got this these neutrons, remember, they go through the cloth. Well, they go through the blood too. And when they're going through the blood, they irradiate the blood. Now, when you irradiate the blood, remember, radiation lasts a long time. So they irradiate the blood, and then you put that irradiated blood out into ultraviolet light, like sunlight at an exposition, and it turns bright red, just like we see. But normal blood, it never is bright red, right? It always goes, the longer, the blood is there, goes from bright red to dark red to, to basically brown and finally to black. Well, none of these blood stains are black. They're all bright red for a lot of reasons. People thought, oh, this has got to be paint. Couldn't possibly. But irradiated blood that's exposed to ultraviolet light absolutely turns everything bright red. So that's just another enigma. How did the inside of the body get also, the backbone, the bones inside the hands, etc. How did all this inside information get to the surface of that cloth? I mean, how did the body become, transparent? Well, in the particle radiation hypothesis, remember, the inside particles in the backbone, they're, simultaneously disintegrating along with the surface particles. But remember, in order for the backbone particles to hit the cloth, it's going to take a split second longer because they're more distant from the cloth. By that time, the surface particles will have already moved onto the cloth, opening the path. So in other words, all these particles, the path opens in front of them so that all the inside particles can then hit the cloth. But of course, they're going to do it with lesser intensity because they had to travel further. And so you can farther. And so you can see that basically that you're going to get the three-dimensional perfect layering of an MRI. And the story goes on and on. The dorsal image is equal intensity to the frontal image. We always wondered, how can that be, since the body is sitting right on top of the dorsal part of the image, right, the cloth, and all the force of gravity and the weight of the body is down on that cloth? That should be the stronger image, the front one less so. However, that is not the case. In point of fact, they're equal intensity. But in a nuclear reaction, the vacuum is created, and the vacuum pulls the two sheets toward the center at equal intensity. It's unbelievable. Every enigma is answered by this particle radiation hypothesis. And like I said, if that happened, it's a miracle, because just as Jesus's body was turning spiritual, right? I mean, just as that is happening, his physical body is being emblazoned on that linen cloth with the very particles that constituted it. And the very particles that constitute it are strengthening that cloth, almost as if God had this plan, like, I'm really going to impress you guys. From now, this is going to be a real doozer. And of course, when you get right down to it, there's even a way to confirm this hypothesis. I mean, obviously, the 42 enigmas explained. That's a good start. That's a real good reason to believe it. But the second thing that's very interesting is that whenever you have a low temperature nuclear reaction, you're always going to get cosmogenic isotopes like chlorine 36 or calcium 41 or something like that.
I was just thinking that exactly
well.
that exact same thing. I was just thinking that.
That's right. Yeah. But, well, this is the deal. So in the future, right, I mean, there's going to be more investigations of the Shroud. I mean, basically, the city council in Turin is going to have to open this up, and we're going to have to get some more investigations going. What's the first thing all those physics guys are going to be looking for? Cosmogenic isotopes. If you find those cosmogenic isotopes in abundance on that Shroud, bango! There's the confirmation. I mean, a low temperature nuclear reaction happened. I can tell you what was going on 2,000 years ago when that image was formed. Basically, the body undergoes the low temperature nuclear reaction. There's the what we call the neutron flux and the proton deuteron flux. These flows of particles, trillions upon trillions of particles, are zooming up into the cloth. And literally, as the body is becoming a spiritual body, the physical body is leaving the remnant of itself embedded with the very particles that constitute it in the cloth, while the neutrons are strengthening the cloth, making it resistant to solids. I mean, the shroud is the most extraordinarily strong cloth, and so forth in the whole wide world. So anyway, the long and the short of it is, this is what's taking place, and it's followed by a very bright light and a boom. And that, of course, is probably what happened 2,000 years ago at Easter. Essentially, you've got this boom, this bright light, these particle flows that are producing this image. And of course, the odds of this occurring by pure chance, as I just said, are tantamount to the same as the monkey typing the first chapter of Macbeth by random tapping of the keys perfectly in a single try. All we're doing is looking right at the face of God, who's winking at us in this scientific generation going, gotcha.
That is amazing. That is just incredible. Okay, we've never had a guest come on and give such an incredible answer to a single question. So that was amazing. Thank you. That was
you
great.
asked for it.
I did. It's my own fault.
All I said was, can you dig into that for a second?
And I feel like we should probably have you back just so we can talk about the Shroud of Turin and the resurrection.
Sure. That'd be good.
I have one more question though about near-death experiences, and I know that we're pressed for time, but I want to ask this, and this kind of comes from my own pastoral experience working with people as they're coming to the end of their life. I have more than once had somebody, when I come into their hospital room or to their bedside, I've prayed with their family, I've anointed them, maybe I've come back a second day to visit them or something, and they'll open their eyes and look at me and say, "Oh, I'm still here."
Yeah.
And when my grandfather was dying, I remember he woke up at one point and he looked around and he said, "Was my mother here?" And his mother died when he was 6 years old, and he was 93 at the time. And another time he woke up and he looked around and he just asked us what day it was. And we told him, and he knew where he was, but it was like he was coming back.
Yeah.
And he was asking then about his brothers and talking about how he missed his brothers who had both predeceased him. And so in my mind, I wonder, is there not so much it's not a near death, but a prior to death experience where people are seeing loved ones and friends who have already died, but they're seeing them like in anticipation of their own death?
Oh, yeah. Deathbed visions are exceedingly frequent, and especially for kids who are, obviously they're little kids, but they have terminal cancer, and of course angels will generally come to them, sometimes a relative, but mostly angels will come and say, "Well, Johnny, you're going to die on Thursday at 6:00. And he goes, "Oh, okay, but you're going to be okay because you're going to come with me." And he goes, "Okay, and he says, "Now, your mother's going to be very sad. So you tell her that this is what's going to happen and explain to her that, you saw me." So Johnny goes, "Well, Mom, I'm going to die on Thursday at 6:00. And the angel told me this, and I'm going with him." And, "Oh, no, you're not going to die at 6:00. No, then you got the best medical care. That's not going to happen." Of course, Johnny goes, "But I think it is going to happen because the angel told me. And but I just want you to know, Mom, I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to see you later, in heaven, because I'm going there with the angel right now." And of course, the mother, "I'm not letting go." Thursday at 6:00, of course, these nurses report again and again in these deathbed vision things of children, right? And in these children's hospitals, they report, Thursday at 6:00, there the child dies, on cue. And of course, that's very, very typical. Also, my own grandfather, very much like I think you were saying your grandfather. My grandfather, he was a really, truly brilliant man. And this guy was sitting in his room. He was about 98 years old, and he is surrounded by the family members. And of course, he's talking away, half in Dutch and half in English. And finally, somebody said, "Well, Granddaddy, who are you talking to?" And he goes, I'm talking to the angels. You don't see the angels? They, no, no, we don't, but go
Mm.
ahead and talk. You go, okay, so he continues talking with the angels. And then finally, of course, he looks up and he goes, can I go now? And everybody said, well, sure. Just like that,
Wow.
he dies. And of course,
Wow.
all I can say is, whoa, the whole family just, they couldn't believe it. So, it is interesting that these things happen. They happen very frequently. And for little kids, it's not just at the time of death. It's like beforehand. And sometimes they can see in the room. They'll say, oh, do you see mom? Do you see Lucy? Do you see, whatever, some relative or somebody? And people will go, no, no, they right in the corner, right there, so
Mm.
no, no, we don't see them. But this happens very, very frequently. They're called deathbed visions. And the children, they oftentimes have visions, but they are sometimes 2, 3, 4, including weeks ahead of time. But they are
Wow.
aware of the time when, the angel will come to get him.
That is incredible. And just to see
Father, did you
how
just look
in all
behind
of
you?
that God is. I did. There was a noise outside my office. That's why I was looking
Okay,
behind.
I was just
Sorry.
making sure you weren't looking for a relative or something.
No, there's nobody. Nobody's coming to visit me. It's okay. No, it's just it's so beautiful to see how in all of this, in the mystery of death and the mystery of what it is to die. There's even some insight. And
Yeah.
what a comfort that can be, especially to
Yeah.
people who have faith. But that there's also, and I'm really moved by the amount of scientific knowledge that is and scientific effort that's been devoted to this, because I think exactly to your point, Father Spitzer, this speaks to our scientific age and to a skeptical age in a
Yeah.
really powerful way. It's beautiful to hear this.
Oh, yeah, which is why the Gen Z's got to get this information. They put so much faith and stock in science, and yet all the scientific data is there. Just at the very moment when the scientists are becoming theists, the doctors are overwhelmingly theists. The young people are leaving the faith because they think there's no scientific evidence for God, the soul, or Jesus. And
Right.
it's just exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
If
Well,
someone wanted to, other than your course, right? If someone wanted easy access to readable material, right? So
Yep.
like I know I would struggle to read a scientific journal just because I'm unfamiliar with so much of the jargon.
Yeah.
But where would someone like me be able to find some more?
3 places. Number 1, Science at the Doorstep to God. That's my brand new book from Ignatius Press, just came out.
There you go.
And just read chapter 4. It's really very, it, of course, it's going to present some scientific data, but it's readable, accessible.
Right.
At least that's what I have been told. The second thing is go to our website, magicenter.com. When you go to magicenter.com, just go to free resources and go to articles and videos. And there you will see several articles and videos free of charge on this area of near-death experiences, and also the Shroud of Turin and other things that we've discussed. And so we also have a third thing. You can get it from the same website. It's called the Essential Modules. And it's basically 7 modules that are, you go to magicenter.com, click on Essential Modules, and there you will see something. Each of the modules is about 35 minutes each, but it goes through near-death experiences, goes through Eucharistic miracles, it goes through the shroud evidence for Jesus, but it's meant for basically a middle school to high school audience. And so again, that's free of charge. It's meant to be for even a middle schooler to understand, and they do. They frequently have the success there. But if you really want a course, I would go to Sophia Institute for Teachers. and just pick up the Catholic Faith and Science for your course if you're a science teacher, or if you're a middle school teacher, pick up Speak the Faith, and just look at those courses, because I'm telling you, you should see, just click on our student responses. It's unbelievable. It changes those kids' lives. I mean, they take that course, and I'm telling you, they will say, I was part of that group that was going to leave the faith. I was just moments away. Why didn't anybody tell me this stuff before? I can tell you this course has changed my life completely. Now, instead of feeling like a skeptic, I feel like the kind of person who can really help others to defend their faith. I mean, this is like again and again and again and again. We find this in those qualitative results, those survey results, they're there on our website. I think it's called Student Endorsements or something like that on the website.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, we'll make sure we link to that also in our show notes, so that our listeners can find an easy way. But Father Robert Spitzer, this is incredible. Thank you so much. What a great conversation with you today.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks, Father, for doing this, because got to tell you, getting the word out is not my specialty, but it is yours. So thank you for giving me the chance.
That's good, because I don't know much about isotopes.
They're really important, actually.
I believe it. Thank you, Father.
All right,
okay, God bless you guys.
Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know what you thought down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.